Ever feel like your mouth just absolutely refuses to cooperate with your brain when you're trying to speak a new language? Welcome to today's explainer, where we're going to decode the hidden cognitive and linguistic forces that completely shape how we sound. Today, we're using Japanese learners of English as our case study to uncover the invisible mechanics of speech. We'll be drawing directly from decades of linguistic research to show you exactly why mastering a new accent is such a monumental challenge. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The pronunciation puzzle. 2. Two types of errors. 3. The formality paradox. And 4. The katakana trap. All right, let's jump right into part 1, the pronunciation puzzle, the mystery of the persistent accent. You know the drill. You grind through the grammar, you flip through endless flashcards, you might even totally understand the native speakers you're listening to. And yet, why is it so incredibly tough to shake that foreign sound when speaking a second language? Why does the accent just stick around, sometimes for a literal lifetime, no matter how fluent you get? Well, linguist Komodo hit the nail on the head way back in 1969. And this brings us to our core thesis today. Having quote-unquote bad pronunciation is not a failure of effort. It's actually a systematic clash with the deeply ingrained linguistic habits of your native tongue. Your mouth has spent decades perfecting the gymnastics required for your first language, and now you're asking it to completely rewrite its muscle memory. Which brings us to section 2, two types of errors, the rulebook clash. To really get what's happening here, we've got to look at linguist Roy C. Major's research. He figured out our brains are basically fighting a two-front war. First, you have transfer errors. Think of this as your brain just copy-pasting your native language's rulebook directly onto the new language. For example, a Japanese speaker might use their native Japanese flop sound instead of an English L or R, simply because it's the closest tool they already have lying around in their mental toolbox. But then, on the flip side, you have developmental errors. These are totally different. These are just universal human speech instincts. Everybody makes them, regardless of their native language. It's just the brain trying to map out a new phonological system and temporarily overcompensating along the way. Okay, moving on to section 3, the formality paradox. Why trying harder makes it worse. You'd naturally assume that the harder you try, the better your pronunciation gets, right? Actually, science says no. Major's research tracked how accurately Japanese learners pronounce word final voiced stops, so sounds like the B in cab or the D in bed. In casual, everyday conversation, they hit a certain baseline of accuracy. But here is the crazy part. When they read from a formal word list, which is a time when they are incredibly focused and trying their absolute hardest, their accuracy actually tanks. It completely shatters the assumption that hyper-focusing equals better pronunciation. So what's going on? It boils down to something called terminal devoicing. Remember those developmental errors we just talked about? This is one of them. It's this universal human instinct to drop the voicing of a consonant right before a pause. And because reading a formal list of words naturally creates these weird, distinct pauses between every single item, it completely tricks the brain. Those unnatural pauses trigger the biological instinct to devoice that final consonant. Basically, by trying to be super clear and formal, the learner is accidentally sabotaging their own pronunciation. Let's bring it all together in section 4, the katakana trap, orthographic illusions. For this final piece of the puzzle, we're shifting from the biology of speech over to the psychology of reading. If we zoom in on the acoustic data for nasal sounds like M, N, and that tricky velar nasal sound in a word like singer, each one has its own specific biological action and acoustic signature, measured in frequencies we call formants. The sound has this distinctively high F2 frequency right around 2000 Hz. The catch? The Japanese language simply doesn't have a standalone puzzle piece for this specific sound. Because of that, Japanese speakers literally struggle to even process or categorize that high frequency when it hits their ears. Since that acoustic contrast is totally missing from their native rulebook, it creates a massive perception gap. Studies actually show that while English and Korean listeners can tell these nasal sounds apart with about 90% accuracy, Japanese listeners hover right around 60%. They misidentify that sound almost 40% of the time. And here's the kicker. If you can't hear a sound properly, you definitely can't speak it properly. So when trying to say a word like sing, the learner will often unconsciously stick a hard gus sound at the very end just to compensate, turning sing into singer. And this perfectly illustrates what researchers call the katakana trap. To learn English, a lot of textbooks rely on katakana, the native Japanese script used for loan words also known as wasei-eigo. Take the English word ring. When a learner visually sees the katakana version, Ringu, their brain just entirely bypasses the actual English acoustic data. The native writing system is acting like a toxic middleman. It visually forces your brain to apply native pronunciation rules to foreign words, which basically guarantees that added hard G sound, totally hijacking your ability to both hear and produce the real English word. As we wrap up this explainer, think about your own language learning journey for a second. Are you genuinely struggling to physically master the new sounds, or are you actually just battling the invisible, deeply ingrained forces of your own native alphabet and the biological instincts of your own mouth? The next time you're practicing, ask yourself, are you listening to the actual sound or just your brain's translation of it? Something to chew on. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.